Now the 15-week telecourse, The Teenager.
There isn't any parent who isn't concerned about the groups and the gangs that the teenager and his family runs around with. And of course there's no teenager that isn't worried about how to interpret back to the family what goes on in these groups. Dr. Zander, I wonder if you could tell us, as we look at these groups, it looks like nothing is happening. Really, what is going on?
In the skit we'll be seeing in a moment, there are 4 young people who are learning these various social skills that adults have to have. We'll see how difficult it is when a boy runs into a situation where he wants to express himself and yet doesn't have ways of doing it, so he retreats to a kind of a primitive sort of behavior, even that of indicating how brave and strong he is. Another thing we can see in this skit is that the girls are trying to exercise some control over these behaviors, are trying to point out to them, they don't say it this way, of course, but are really indicating these are not the ways that an adult ought to behave. So they scold them and actually become upset when the boys carry on in a primitive or over-masculine way.
I think Miss Proctor is nicest. I mean, Mr. Fuller is putrid next to Miss Proctor.
Oh, don't get all heated up, Rainey.
What do you know?
I think they're both goofs. Well, let's face it, old Proctor is just as bad as Fats Fuller.
Oh, don't talk like that. Mr. Fuller gained a pound last week.
How do you know?
I heard him talking to Mr. Wolfson. You're an awful liar, Doris. I am not.
Doris is in love with Wolfson anyway.
I am not. What does it say?
Wolfson wears false teeth, Doris.
So what do I care? So does Miss Proctor. She does not.
What if Wolfson and Proctor got their false teeth mixed up?
George.
Couldn't you just hear them in class?
Who in this class feels that they have the hang of algebraic mashed potatoes?
Now, class, let's be silent citizens, class.
George, why you stop that?
Oh, ease off, will you?
I don't think you should talk that way. Face.
I happen to like to talk that way.
I think you're a contemptible slob. I hate you. Why are you so crude?
What do you mean, crude?
Come off it, Doris.
Listen, you know what crude means, and you're crude. You're really crude. See, oh, come on, Rennie. We don't have to stand for any more of this insult.
Hey, what about your share of the bill? I guess you teed off old Rennie, George.
Old Doris was pretty burnt, too.
I thought she was going to throw a right at you. Boy, that'd have been all for you. She's got a crazy right cross.
Oh, I can handle any day my own weight.
Say, what if we won't go to the formal Friday night?
She'll go.
Yeah, but what if she won't?
I'll ask Doris.
And then I'll have to show you my own right cross.
Gee, I wish Rennie didn't get so sensitive.
So she likes old Proctor, so what?
Yeah, she ought to keep it to herself. Now I'll have to apologize.
What for?
That's the way women are.
Irene, that's the way men are. Let's face it, they're stinkers, but they're necessary.
Well, I don't think I'm going to go to that old dance.
Renee.
Well, why do boys have to talk like that?
You ought to be used to it by now. You've been dating the goon for 6 months.
Well, yes, but... Well, he better apologize.
Apologize? George White, apologize?
Yes.
Well, you're really the greatest. I mean, I didn't think you had such control over George.
You've got control over Herbie, haven't you?
Yeah, but he's a cinch. He likes to be controlled.
Well, so does George. We better get back. Say, Miss Proctor doesn't really have false teeth, does she?
Not that I know of.
Well, what did you have to say that about her for, then?
It's no wonder that adults sometimes find it kind of difficult to accept this kind of group life. But as you look back on it, there's a lot of crudity here which might be explained by the attempt somehow to, if you don't know how to handle a situation where you get more primitive, really, and you use your Coke glass and your straws to annoy somebody, and you call them goon face, and a lot of this pretty primitive kind of behavior could be thought of as an exploration. You don't know how to handle a social situation, and that's what you're here to learn, but some of the things you do in the process are kind of uncomfortable, really.
Yes, and the young gentlemen were showing that under tension, the easiest way for them to handle such a matter, since they're males and girls are around, is to show how tough they are to each other and before the girls, even if it means taking on one of the ladies.
As if they're going to fight them or something.
Yes. The other thing that was interesting here was that the girls were the ones who put pressure on to stop that sort of behavior. One reason might be that the girls are actually more mature than the boys at this age, and they've identified with the adult way of living more thoroughly, and so they represent the adult pattern of behavior to the boys.
They're going to push them into it if they can.
Yes. And the skit we're going to see now, these young people will actually be putting some pressure on Irene for a change. The problem is one in which they're concerned with a value. That is, how important are some of the things that grown-ups have set up in our world for us.
So in this example, this drama we're going to see now, we'll see these same four teenagers in the basement of Irene's home, in the playroom downstairs, and they're having one of their typical bull sessions, going over some things and exploring values.
Here we ought to watch for the way they use ridicule and the way that they make her feel alone if she doesn't come around.
Well, what do you mean by education?
I mean getting ready for what you want to do when you have to go to work.
Well, that sort of depends on what you want to do, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. George wants to go into business, but I don't know what I want to do. I know I'll be drafted, and then I'll just wait and see what happens.
I'll be drafted too, so what's the use of worrying about school now? It's only common sense, Irene.
I just don't know.
Like yesterday in civics, Miss Newell said we'd never be good citizens if we didn't know anything about the Constitution.
Now, that's what I mean. Memorizing the Constitution is about the silliest thing I've ever heard of.
I don't think it's so silly.
Well, name something sillier.
Talking like a stupid dope.
Who's talking like a stupid dope?
I mean, I think I'll be as good a citizen as you or Miss Newell.
Well, I know that.
So?
I just don't know.
I think school ought to be more practical.
That's for sure.
So you could do less homework? You know, I don't mind studying in some subjects, but courses like Spanish just are so boring. You know, I can't even stand to take the book home. It's so boring.
Well, I don't think it's so boring.
You know, sometimes, Renee, you're a real square. A four-sided square. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Not to mention being a drip.
Oh, I am not.
But sometimes it seems to me you'd rather study your Spanish than go on out on a date.
Well, George, I would not.
How many hours a week do you spend on your homework?
5 or 6.
I'll bet it's 25.
Oh, it is not, Doris.
What's all the fuss, then?
I don't know. I certainly don't like to do homework.
Neither do I.
Not me.
Who does?
Really, what are you talking about?
Well, it's just that some of the things about school are so silly.
Oh, but there are a lot of good things, too. Now, there may be some things in school that are silly and a waste of time, but you'll find that any place.
Of course, you'll find it in government, you'll find it in banks and law offices, everywhere. But the point is, there's a lot in school that isn't a waste of time.
Like civics?
Sure, what's wrong with civics? Teaches you government. That's important.
Miss Newell told her class that you can't even be a good citizen unless you know about the Constitution.
Well, I think we should know about the Constitution. Now, what's wrong with that?
I don't think you should have to memorize
Who
it.
says you have to memorize it?
Well, that's practically what she said.
Oh, listen, Rini, I want you to do me a favor.
What?
Take our word for it. Almost everything you learn in school is important. You'll understand that when you get a little older. But you can't go along without getting a good education, and that's the truth.
I think it depends on what you're going to do.
I thought you wanted to be a nurse.
I do.
Well, that means you have to go to college.
And that you'll have to study.
And you'll have to take a lot of different subjects.
And you'll have to get good marks.
You see what we mean?
I guess so.
Well, here we can see certainly quite a different set of pressures, and this family seems to be pretty close. Out of this closeness, I suppose there comes some need to conform. What makes a group really attractive to a teenager? And as we know teenagers and have studied them, they find so much satisfaction out of their own age that this means that in many instances, at least, the parent's going to be sort of left out, and you are going to find it impossible always to balance the influence of some of these groups.
But this problem has been studied quite specifically. For example, a study of teenage girls found that when the girls were learning things that were in contradiction to what they had been taught by their parents, they would be likely to accept these that had been given them by their friends if they were at a distance from their parents. If, however, they were very close to their parents and they felt that it was in the family that most of their needs were gratified, they tended to hold out against the beliefs that were being supported by their friends.
Now, we've sort of talked about conformity partly as a negative kind of thing, but actually it's a process by which we become socialized and is one of the most important things. A person who doesn't care to conform certainly isn't going to get along very well. Another sign that parents frequently see, especially in a teenage boy, is sudden concern about how he looks, and he wants to comb his hair and look neat when a few weeks ago that would have been the last thing he was interested in. This really implies a whole new set of social skills that have to be learned.
Or he puts slick stuff on his hair to make it lie down smoothly. Or the girl spends many hours in preparing herself, trying out various hairdos, various ways of fixing up the face. A great deal of interest in, again, trying to look like a woman.
Now, another way to see this problem is to see the way the interest in the opposite sex changes. And I think we can notice that if we look at this particular chart here. In this particular chart, we have the various grades at school. Over here, we have the percent. And what these children were asked to do, and the teenagers and the older adolescents, is to name their friends. And they charted here the number of, the percent of friends that they chose from the opposite sex. Now, at the first grade, about 35% or so of the boys chose girls and the girls chose boys. They didn't care too much, about a third of them, whether or not they chose boys or girls. It was all right as long as you had somebody to play with. Anybody could be your friends. But this decreases down this time. And actually, by about the fourth grade, it's pretty low. They're not interested in choosing the opposite sex at all. In fact, they take pride in not choosing. There's some variation in this, but it maintains about down to the sixth grade. And then something happens that is quite different. High school and senior high school period, we notice the great increase in choice of the opposite sex for your friends. So by the time they're seniors, about 75% of them prefer a member of the opposite sex for their friend.
For example, think back to the first time you called on a girl. You rang the front door, you were allowed to come into the living room, the parents greeted you.
I always used to hope they weren't there.
Well, let's assume they were there to complicate the situation, but she isn't. She's upstairs, of course, on her second hour of getting herself ready. You're sitting there, you think about, didn't we have a good football game last week? And then the clock ticks quietly. The parents are probably just as embarrassed as you were at that time. They're trying to think of something to say with this shiny-eared character who's suddenly shown up out of nowhere. They'd like to get to know him, like to make him comfortable, but it's hard for them. All the way around, as these things start to develop, both parents and kids have their difficulties. But I suppose the most dramatic ones and the ones that have the greatest feeling are for the adolescents, because the parents can always light a cigarette or remember they've got the dishes to do, and please excuse me.
Of course, you wonder, you don't want to be too stupid at this time and what they'll think of you if you sit there and you just don't know what to say, and everything you say seems to be wrong. If you talk about one political party, they belong to the other, and almost anything goes wrong at that time.
If this were an early adolescence and you were taking her to a dance, then we might ask ourselves what would happen at this affair. Perhaps you at that point hadn't developed a great deal of skill in dancing, so that you got there, you felt more comfortable hanging around with the fellows who were down at the other end of the room. The girls started dancing together. You wondered whether you dare risk your skills that you had picked up at dancing class and try to ask a girl for a dance, but it's more comfortable here with the fellows. Eventually you get wrestling or tossing pennies. The girls are carefully and sedately carrying out the dance. Maybe one boy is brave enough to take a spin at asking a girl for a dance, but he's probably brought back into the wrestling match a little later on. Why does this occur? Well, it's really a difficult kind of a situation to learn suddenly how to approach such a fearsome character as this girl who's all so beautifully made up, smelling so nice for the first time tonight. And all sorts of difficult questions arise that it's easier to settle by staying with my own kind.
Feel more comfortable, boys with boys. As a matter of fact, these boys with boys may be talking about girls, but they stay over in the other end of the gym or something like that. Of course, the girls do show their interest in these new social skills a little earlier.
Yes, the girls would probably be talking about relations between girls and boys even before the boys would ever get to this conversation. If we were to draw on this curve we were just looking at, just the frequency with which the girls chose the boys, we'd probably have a curve that started much sooner and rose much more sharply, which I could think could create all kinds of problems for parents who begin to wonder, well, the boys in the room aren't interested in girls. Are our daughters forward? Are they not playing the proper role in our society as to how women should behave?
So there are a lot of complications because of the difference in timing at which this interest in a new social role develops, I suppose.
Very much.
I would say that as parents, we certainly have to be very considerate, because when there's any great change in social customs like this, and when there's so many new things to be learned, there are bound to be blunders and awkwardnesses, and you lead off with a loud blast when you should be quiet and so on, and it's an uncomfortable time, and you can really make it pretty painful for the adolescents if you aren't careful about this.
Certainly so. It's true for any of us who are in a situation where we must change, but they have many changes raining down in upon them in just a few years. But it has another interesting consequence that's often remarked in the life of teenagers, and that is the tremendous use of the telephone. They check up on what did you get on problem number 7 in algebra, or do you know what I saw Jane do the other night? The note she got from so-and-so, don't you wish you knew what so-and-so said about such and such? All of this has to go on at great length and at a great deal of despair of the adults while they communicate with each other, because they're too far away now to go and have
They can't
easy
run right over,
conversation.
they have to talk over the phone.
Yes.
And of course, there's another point here, too. The way the teenager acts frequently makes a parent suspect that they're about to run away and get married with some of these people they don't even know. And you'd sort of, as a parent, like to at least get a look at them and get a little bit of feeling of security about them.
The telecourses seen on this program was modeled after a course presented on campus, was specially designed for use on television. Don Hall speaking. This program was produced on kinescope film in the University Studios in Ann Arbor. This is University of Michigan Television.